Thank you, Pia, and thank you all for being here. It's always fantastic to be in Rome. Can you all hear me okay? Great. Always fantastic to be in Rome in the spring on a day like today and yesterday. It's particularly awesome. Um, I want to thank Pia for inviting me to be here, and Rob Neal, who she mentioned, who many of you may know, was a leader on the building committee of the cathedral. So he was, I think, made the introduction perhaps. And then Bishop Kevin Van, who commissioned us to work on the project, which he was a great force of inspiration for us. We're going to talk about Christ Cathedral, an existing modern building that was done for another set of purposes, some related, some very unrelated, that we helped to be part of a team to adaptively reuse it to become the cathedral for the Diocese of Orange. And more broadly, an approach to how one takes an existing building, and particularly a modern building. I was saying earlier that the Catholic Church now has 2 millennia of profound buildings that sometimes we have to think a little harder about how to approach a building that maybe is not profound in the normal Catholic way and convert it intelligently and humanely for Catholic service. And that's what we tried to do here. You can be the judge of how that all works out. But anyway, I think if I understand the piloting here, there. So can everyone see all right with the lights on and all that? Okay, great. So this is the existing building. I might turn the lights off if everyone can see all right. The building as we found it was actually a kind of a monumental building. It opened in 1980 and began to provide service to Reverend Robert Schuler, who had hired Philip Johnson, John Bergey of Johnson Bergey to design it. Spoiler alert, I was actually a very young architect apprentice in my 20s, and I worked in that office in New York City at about the time this was done. So I kind of had a mouse's view through the wall about what was going on, and I worked on various parts of it for a while. This is the site. It's 20 acres. So the diamond you see in the middle is a plan view of the building. There's a lot of interesting buildings around it, and they're all in red there. The one on the bottom was the first building that Reverend Schuler built, called the Arboretum by a well-known architect. Then next to that, the little round piece is another building. And up in the far left corner are the offices, the pastoral offices, and a school. And it's about 20 acres. Those other buildings that preceded us and are around the cathedral, one of them is called the Arboretum, and it was designed by an architect. If you're familiar with West Coast, the architect was Richard Neutra, a rather famous mid-century modern architect. This was the Arboretum, and you'll notice Reverend Schiller there. On the one hand, he's got his folks, his congregation inside the Arboretum delivering a sermon. On the other hand, there's all those folks outside, and I'll explain why. There's a very fine barrier between inside and outside in Southern California because of the fantastic nature of the weather. And he actually started by giving sermons outside. So he continued to bring that through as a tradition in his buildings. He also then later in the 60s built a tower. It's a very tiny tower. On the top floor is a chapel. It's very beautiful and overlooks the site. And then in the 90s, Richard Meyer, the architect, New York architect, quite well known, was working on the Getty, a large museum and cultural center in West Los Angeles. And while he was there, he was retained to do the cultural center, which sits next to the cathedral. Now, just thinking about what's happening here. Here's Reverend Schuller, a Reformed evangelical minister, hiring these architects. These are a couple of the houses of Richard Neutra, which made him kind of the architect of the mid-century. This is actually the Getty Center by Richard Meyer, which is happening at about the same time that he built on our site. And then Philip Johnson and John Bergey, Johnson Bergey, on the right actually is a house he built in 1949 when he was just beginning, and it was just post-World War II. But interestingly, it was called the Glass House, because there's so much glass. Now we look at it today and it looks pretty simple. It's a box, glass on all sides, floor to ceiling, but it's become an icon and it's a landmark that you can visit. It's in the National Preservation And then on the left is a building in the mid-'80s that came out, which was the headquarters for PPG. PPG was Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company and was the largest provider of glass for buildings in America. So he did that headquarters as well. And so he had a lot of experience with designing with glass. I want to point out this building, which is a very small outbuilding on his site in New Canaan, where the glass house is. This was Philip Johnson's estate. And I pointed out, you'll see it in a few minutes later, but this is a small building of two triangles in plan that sit together and then slide slightly. And their sloping ceilings have a ridge, and the ceilings are glass. You can see on the inside and the outside, the ceilings are all glass. Well, you're going to see in Crystal Cathedral something similar and then something more. So because I was in the office and I was familiar what they were all doing, and then 30 years passed and I was brought back, maybe I had a unique kind of passenger seat. now I'm reminded, I want to sort of paraphrase something Chekhov said about families, how in some ways they're all the same, in some ways they're totally different. And that would be true maybe of communities and cultures and regions as well. We're all the same, of course, and yet how we manifest that is quite different. These are 4 images of Southern California trying to capture what was happening after World War II. On the one hand, people who'd passed through the ports and came back after the war repopulated Southern California. There was more in-migration into Southern California than there had been anywhere else in the country. Orange County is the most diverse community in America. Housing was being built, and because everybody had cars, houses were single family, and you drove to your house, you drove to your church, you drove for groceries. And so, of course, they built freeways everywhere to facilitate all this. And because you had so many people, you had entertainment and recreation in the lower left. That became a very embraced, popular thing characterizing Southern California. And then on the right, one of the things when you have all these cars and you need entertainment, and I don't know how many parts of the world or the country have this, but in Southern California, we had drive-in movie theaters, and a lot of people got in their car. Instead of going to the grocery store, they went in an evening and watched movies from their car. Reverend Schiller, who moved with his wife from Iowa in the mid-'50s, came to Southern California, and he had trouble finding a place to give his sermons, but he found 2. One was an empty Baptist hall, which he could rent on Sunday mornings, and the other was the top of a snack shop at a drive-in movie theater, where if you didn't want to dress up and come to church, you could just throw your kids in the car with their pajamas on and their breakfast and drive in, and he would be on the roof of the snack bar. His wife, Arvella, who was the organist, would bring the organ in on the back of a flatbed, and she would play the organ. He would deliver the sermon, and you get the service, and then you drove away back home. And he did these 2 every Sunday morning. So he was familiar. He started out in the open, as it were, in a distinctly Southern California environment. And that actually stayed kind of with him. Now you're remembering the Arboretum I showed you a couple minutes ago, where he's sermonizing to the outside, people in their cars. When he developed that, there's a radial parking lot that's focused on the pulpit. And so they could put in and hear him on their microphones, their speakers, while he spoke. People in the hall could also hear him. And so it was interesting. Now, he became quite famous in his time, and he had a program that became the largest internationally broadcast program called Hour of Power. And some of you may have heard of it or known about it. 20 million viewers every Sunday. And he built this. Johnsonburg designed this and built this for him. And it was called Crystal Cathedral, as you've probably heard. It was a cathedral in the way that he provided service. But you'll notice, and I have another picture in a moment, that there's a very tall dais, so he's way up above the people. The congregation is down low. There's no central processional. The congregation is, in a sense, an audience, if you will. The chorus is up high with him. You have light coming in from above. And when I showed you that sculpture gallery of Philip Johnson, I want to tell you that the original proposal by Philip to Reverend Schiller was that he would have this glass ceiling and the walls would be solid. And when Reverend Schiller heard that, the story goes, he says, oh, no, I want everything glass. I want as if I'm just outside speaking to everyone inside and outside, no barriers. So Philip and John developed the whole glass building. And in order to do that and be sure sight lines were good and there were no columns and beams and all that, they developed the space frame concept, which is a series of cords, trusses, which you can see up here, all the trestle work. So there's no columns, there's nothing in the way. It's all free open span. Well, that was good for sermonizing for Reverend Schiller, but it was also very good for TV because there were no sightline issues. Cameras could be stationed wherever. He was up high. You got perfect natural light. The sun brought all the right full color to the screen. And then you see the ceiling up there. That's a rack of cameras from above, which can all be programmed. So he could broadcast worldwide from his cathedral. So he was quite well known for that. But when we were asked to come in 2013, I guess you begin every venture slightly naive, and we thought, well, we all have experiences with Christianity, with the Catholic faith, but the thing that comes immediately to mind is, at least as an architecture student, I should probably say, is the great history of centuries of Catholic cathedrals and religious buildings. And you think of the basilicas first comes to mind, and the processional qualities of the Mass, the drama of it, frequently the cruciform plan, the solidity because of the time they were built, where they're solid. They can be dark with the penetration of mysterious light coming through clear stories, and all the qualities that kind of, that's what we've kind of come to think of as the Catholic ethos, if you will. And we could go on with many examples of that. Having said that, through the mid-century, the late mid-century, there have been a lot of modern Catholic buildings as well. In the city I grew up in, San Francisco, St. Mary's Cathedral out on Geary is there, and it's actually a central cruciform plan. It's not a processional basilican plan. And others, these are a few of the others that were done in more of a modern language. But again, this is now a slightly elevated view of looking at the building when Reverend Schiller was active in it. You can see how it was occupied. It has upper mezzanines, lower floor, elevated apron where the chorus and Reverend is. There's actually a 90-foot tall door right there. You see the hinges at the top. You see the hinges at the top, and that's because Reverend Schiller wanted a 90-foot tall door that would open up, and he could turn around from the pulpit and address the people in the cars. So that thing that began his career, he brought through several iterations, even to this building. So that's what we had when we arrived, and then when we were asked to present, we looked at three different ideas. One was more or less the Basilica processional idea. And you're seeing the plan there, the diamond. The diamond is stretched long in the east-west direction, and it's compact in the north-south direction. The beautiful thing about it, of course, is that it's perfectly cardinal oriented. So the sun comes up in the east and it sets in the west. The north is without sunlight. The south, arguably the narthex, the main entry, comes in from the south where the sun is. So there's a lot of nice natural features to the position and the shape of the building, but the only way one could get a long processional, a long basilica approach was to come in on one side and come sideways through the building. So we did it, we looked at it, we weren't crazy about that as an idea. There was a lot of talk when we were beginning about, could it be a central altar location? So the purple is the predella, the elevated plinth, and the altar in this case is right in the center. And we were allowing entry on three sides. That, of course, would put the altar in the middle, and some people would have a frontal view, some people would have a side view, some people would have a rear view to the clergy performing the service at the altar. But there was a lot of interest in the building committee and among some of the priests for this. And the last of three schemes that we looked at was, we called again the processional. And we just left the building as it was, came in off the bottom, off the south, and then pushed the altar all the way to the north. It's the short axis, but it's still allowed for a processional. What we ended up with in looking at that and talking over many weeks with everyone was kind of a compromise on 2 and 3. So you can see there's circulation left and right, but it dead ends. The primary entrance is on the south, which is what the building was intended to be, to come in. We defined the floor, the ground floor of the sanctuary as a perfect rectangle, and we pushed the predella and altar just slightly to the north of center. So you could still enter from the plaza, you could still proceed up and in and up to the predella and to the altar. And then the bishop's chair and the ambo or the lectern were pushed back against the wall. On the far left is the baptistry. So it's not really an entry, it's a baptistry space. It's enclosed. And on the right is the chapel of the Blessed Sacrament with the with a circle. And again, that's not entered from outside. So that slid into what were formerly entrances into the building. The other thing about it, this is the mezzanine. So you have the 3 sloping mezzanines, and the organ, which would be in the top, right up here. This is the primary organ. It's called the Hazelwright organ, and it was built in Italy and restored during our time over 2 years in Italy. And the pipes are there. There are also some down here. The organ console moves around. Sometimes it's here, sometimes it's there. And there are also pipes on the ends here to bring sound from all directions. These are sections through the building. Just gives you an idea of the relative scale. If I tell you that this right here varies from, that's the lower register. That's where we would be on the ground floor of the sanctuary. That's between 14 and 18 feet. Then you can see how tall the building is. It's quite remarkable for its height. It's 120 feet up to the top. Underneath the entry level, which is all at grade, there's a basement floor or an undercroft. And a lot of things happen there: sacristies, prep spaces, wedding, family rooms, vesting. But there are 2 spaces in particular that are column free. The one at the bottom is column free, and then the 2 in green. And what that allows us to do is have a music rehearsal room in the bottom, where choir, instrumentation, all that can practice. The orange up above, which we haven't done yet, we're about to embark on, will be the chapel of St. Callistus, and it's a smaller sanctuary for about 250 people for services. The main floor services about 2,000, so the scale is quite different. And then there were a series of technical problems that we encountered here that when everything was microphoned and broadcast and sent out weren't problems. But when that wasn't a priority in the case of the Catholic mission, it had to work for everybody that was in the building experiencing the Mass. And acoustics was one of the big problems. The space was so big, and it was all glass, so it was so reverberative. And the reverberation time, which is to say, if I say hello, when hello comes back to me, it's 4 seconds later. Now, if you're doing Gregorian chants, maybe that's good, right? No one cares, no one notices. But if you're doing a spoken word, I would just be a mumble of sound to all of you if you were sitting there, or the first time you heard me was 4 seconds, or you heard me in 1 second, and then you heard me again 4 seconds later, what I just said to you. So there was a lot of reverberation issues there. So we knew in what we did to the building, we had to be able to fix that. So it was good for music, and it was also good for the spoken word, which requires really a very tight reverberation period. One of the things we did in that bottom 14 to 18 feet, what you see there, is a series of faceted limestone walls. Those facets, these are kind of boring drawings that only an architect could love, but I show them to you so you can see there's a large cell plan sections that we developed, these chunks, if you will, of limestone, vertical, and they were in different orientations. There were, I think, 3, and we randomly mixed them all the way around the bottom so that when sound came out from wherever, it would have multiple reflectivities. It would diffuse sound back to the listeners, the people sitting in those seats. So there's an importance of being able to do that. And you see the elevations in the upper left, more architectural type drawings, but you see there in the middle left, another plan of how those facets all work to sort of disperse the sound and clarify it to the listener. And then these stones, like a lot of the natural stone in the building, were shipped to Italy, where the most advanced fabrication plants exist, probably Mazza de Carrara and other places. And you can see that it was cut from slabs on the left. Bishop Van actually came out. He was mostly concerned about the quality of the stones. Over the course of construction, he would come to Italy every few months just to check on the marble and the stone and be sure that it was coming along well, and it did come along just fine. And then you see the tables where they fabricate and cut it. And then you see it laid out on the floor to be sure that it has the right angles, reflectivities. And then it gets packed away in crates carefully and then shipped to the site where it's then installed. The other part of it that we were interested in, I guess I'd like to say too, we thought metaphorically as architects that the stone in that bottom was like the earth, that if somehow explicitly or implicitly you sat there, you felt you were enveloped in the earth, and that's the bottom 18. But the 100 feet above, this dramatic height was more about the heavens and things above the earth. And we were trying to see if we could create a kind of a tangible sense of that through the way that we used materials in the building. So we were interested in the space frame and kind of what it does for light and faceting the light. We were interested in even artist's treatment of glass and what that would do. And so we created a digital model of the inside of the cathedral. And this is just an architect's drawing of that 3D. And we took the space frame was made up of squares in plan. And those squares we cut into 4 triangles. And on the lower left, you see those triangles. And we had 4 different types. And in one case, case 1, the triangles were all closed and flat. So they would reflect back all the sound that hit them. In one case, they'd be open 15 degrees, 30 degrees, and 45 degrees. So they're like a blossom that would be more open or more closed. And then we distributed them through 6,000 squares on the ceiling and on the walls. And we basically distributed them in a way to try to eliminate glare. Now, when you're sitting or standing and you're looking more or less laterally, like to the east or to the west, the sun is low. The sun is low in either case, sunrise, sunset. That's when you get direct light into your eyes and you get high glare. Once it gets higher and higher, you tend not to do this much. So you don't really get glare looking straight up. As a practical matter, you get it lower down. So you can see there are more open, more yellow down in the lower zone and less so in the upper zone. So we distributed the 6,000 petals or quatrefoils, as we called them. And this sort of shows you our thinking in it. Basically, we were creating an inner liner inside the outer shell of the building, say building a boat inside a boat, if you will. So you had the glass exterior of the 4 diagrams and glass exterior in the upper left. And then you had the space frame in the lower left. And then we created a set of unistruts or minor frames in the upper right. And then to that, we attached all the quatrefoils. And a quatrefoil, sort of a fancy name, it's actually a name that comes from a Gothic vault. You may have heard of it. A vault, you have a groin and you have 4 quatrefoils. And it was our using that word for our purpose, really. But they were made up of perforated white metal so that some of the sound that hit them reverberated back into the space. But through the holes, then there was an acoustical material, absorptive material in the holes. So some portion of that went in and was absorbed. And behind that was a clear plastic layer that would allow the panels, when the sun was up there, to be translucent, not either completely opaque nor completely transparent, but translucent to just create an ambient light. So those quatrefoils are kind of like my glasses. I can't see without them, but there's a lot of things going on in the way these lenses are engineered, right? And those quatrefoils were, in a way, those sort of incredible things doing all that work. And then we built models of it. And that model shows you one that's maybe open 15 and 30 degrees. We did digital studies to see how they would work. And then we did digital studies of the light and the glare. And these are 3 studies at summer solstice at 3 o'clock, at 9 o'clock, noon, and 3 o'clock just to see how the light patterns would work. And then we actually had the vendor build them so we could look at them. Now, these don't have those complicated quatrefoils I just described. You're just looking at the panelization, the attachments, and all of that. And these were all worked out here in Southern California, and then built and shipped from Germany. We had a German vendor who machined all of that and sent it to us, and then we installed it. The other part, which is kind of interesting, this is I don't know if it's amusing. It's an interesting picture, but it gives you an insight into the challenges of an idea that on one hand is so simple, on the other hand, it's like scratching your right ear with your left hand, right? Or vice versa. If you look at this drawing, we basically had to scaffold the entire interior if we were going to put 6,000 quatrefoils on the inside, controlling the acoustics, controlling the light, creating something for light to bounce back at night. Remember, clear glass in particular, doesn't reflect back. It's transparent. And so if at night you have a glass building and you throw a light up there, it doesn't bounce back and give you light. It just passes through to the outer atmosphere. So you have a night problem. You have to still figure out how to light at night because the light all escapes the building. So these quatrefoils are doing, like I say, my glass, they do a bunch of things without which I can't see. So if you look here during the construction, if you want to go up in there, starting down here, from there, and went up here, and you got over the mezzanine, and then you started climbing and climbing. And then the horizontal trays, if you were going to install on a vertical surface, you were a workman, you were going to work on those horizontal trays to build them into the space frame. And then once you got to the top, they had to put a deck over the whole top so they could get the top as well. So what that experience was kind of like this. And for many months, workers every morning went up, they took their lunch, they went up there and they worked all day, putting these quatrefoils in the frames. And what this gentleman is doing here or down there, they're up on the scaffolding. These guys are on the side scaffolding, and they're placing and engineering and putting all this stuff in. It's arrived from Germany and they're installing it. So it's an enormous effort, but it's building a new lining inside the old. This is just a reminder of the site plan. It's sort of an aerial rendering done early on, but the cathedral in the beginning, we were working with landscape architects at the time to be sure that the plaza in which the cathedral sat was appropriate for the building. And then the shade structure, so things were comfortable, the plantings around and ancillary buildings and all of that. And each quadrant of the plaza had a different purpose. And this is the building as it was done. Now, there are a whole bunch of details I won't go into, except that at the time this was done in 1980, our seismic codes in California were fairly simple. So Johnson and Berge were able to get all these glass panels put onto the building essentially with glue, meaning they weren't held positively captured, we like to say, with frames. They just had very high powered glue. I wasn't Elmer's glue, but it was glue. And they attached it and all was good. They'd had 5 or 6 little fractures, but we'd had no major seismic activity, which created a problem. Since that time in Southern California, we're on a major earthquake fault. You probably know this. And we've had some activity, and those aren't the codes anymore. The codes always get improved and elevated, and every day, every week, every year, there's more you have to do. So we had to go back, we had to fix the few lights that were not adequate, but we had to redesign all the caps so you positively held those glass panels. So if they broke, they would stay in the frame. So there was a sort of a process there of about a year of doing the outside. We didn't really want to change the exterior because over the years, many people come from all over the world to see the building and consider it important in many ways, whether you're an architectural devotee or you're a Christian or now a Catholic. And we wanted the building to have the sense that it always was. So it was fortunate we could say, well, we're going to minimally impact the exterior. We're going to go in and rework the interior in a very big way for the Catholic liturgy and service. So we created white frames, which kind of, once you stepped in that frame, then you were outside, you're inside the building and you're in the new environment but there was a clear delineation between what was before and what was now. And the two volumes you see, this is the Blessed Sacrament Chapel, and on that end, it's baptistry. This right here is the main entry, or Bishop's Door from the south, facing the plaza. So we really didn't change any more than we had to. You're beginning to see what happens with glass at night. And Southern California has a lot of clear days and clear nights. Right now, we have a few too many, actually, trying to solve that problem. But now you're not only do we have bounce light back into the cathedral for evening services, but we also, it's a draw. It's kind of luminescent, and you see it as you're in the townscape. This is also a very low-rise community of commercial strips and single-family houses. So its height makes it visible from a couple miles in every direction. By night, you can see it again. It's quite strong, and none of this was the case before the quatrefoils were put in. This shows you a little more of the detail of the wall and the way we sort of framed our interventions to sort of clarify the old shell with the new building. And then going inside the building, which is really what our effort was all about. This is the baptistry. So it's on the west side of the sunset side near the memorial garden. And it was all done in natural stones. It's an octagonal shape. There's a clear story which brings borrowed light in by day up high. There's a dome with inscription, white gold leaf dome above it. The baptistry in the shape of a crucifix. And then it's a little hard to see with the lens of this camera, but the octagon is highly faceted. And then it's white metal, perforated metal in a cloud pattern. So there appears to be a cloud, circular cloud around you. That is part of what the perforations are about. On the other end, of the east side where the sun rises, was the chapel of the Blessed Sacrament with a tabernacle in the center, and it seats about 40 people. Again, natural stones in a circle. As you enter in the entryway of the cathedral, underneath that white frame we talked about is the bishop's door, and these are two solid bronze doors on pivots that open up. So when there's festal or processional activities where you're moving from the exterior into the interior, those doors are open. You don't need to use those fire exit doors, 3 foot by 9 foot, that open with hardware. You can just open all of those up and you can just flow into the building. And when you go in, you come into the narthex, which is here. And there's another bronze panel which highlights stories from the Old Testament on a panel here on 3 sides. And then you can just get a little bit of a peek into the sanctuary, which has completely been remade. And this is what it is today. The overall view on the left. You can pick out the predella or the square elevated plinth, which is about 18 inches high. 3 6-inch risers gets you up. So the sight lines now to the activity around the altar are good for everyone. The altar is also a square within a square. I would point out the baldachin is above, it's a square. So it's a square over a square on a square. And the baldachin is held up. You see it in large scale here on the right. It's held up by cables. And it's a series of louvers, of platinum louvers that we've concealed lights into so we can throw light down to the activity around the altar. But if you're sitting in a seat, you don't see them because the louvers are shielding the direct light from you. Behind the altar, you can see on the left, or you can look straight ahead on the right, is the cathedra with the bishop's chair. There's a series of chairs, and the chair in the center right on axis is the bishop's chair. And there's a kind of a reredos, which is the frame, a shadow of a reredos, which is the frame. But because we don't have an apse here like a traditional basilica cathedral, the chorus can sit up there. This is, again, one of our tools to deal with the acoustics. When the chorus is singing or there's music, that throws sound out into the sanctuary. Rather than waiting for it to hit some far location and come back to you, it comes directly to you in the sanctuary. You see the 2 large organ stacks on the left and the right. Those were redone. And the ambo or the lectern is just out of view, which sits off to the right, so that all of this is central and undisturbed. All of the pews were redone in a sort of a California walnut, a dark walnut, both in the mezzanine and on the ground floor. And a crucifix and corpus were created to hang through the center of the baldachin. So this is a close-up of the ambo here. You see it here slightly to the left or the east of the altar. And you get a kind of a good view here of all the baffled sound wall behind. This is gray limestone, the cornice, but this is the 14 to 18 feet, and all these are baffled. Push the sound out again. This is the Hazelwright organ. We were told it's the 4th largest organ in the world. I can't verify that personally, but that's what's been said. I know it took 2.5 years to rebuild it all and ship it back and reinstall it. And while they were doing that, we took the cabinetry and re-enameled it. It took it from that kind of mid-pink tone to a white enamel. Our goal here was, frankly, we felt the space was so majestic, and the space, it's hard to, you can do Dodger Stadium and it can be big, but to do a religious space that's big, somehow you also have to be meditative, which seems to be one of the kind of fundamental challenges. So we want to neutralize all the color. If there was going to be a crucifix or a work of sacred art that wanted to be colored to draw your attention to it, that would be a decision that would be made. But as far as the architectural background, we thought the bones were great. They were majestic, they were inspiring. And so everything is really from white to medium gray, all the various stones and all the finishes that you see. And that's just an axial view to the east. Again, you've kind of seen that. And the embroidery of Christ, the colored piece was hung after this was all done on the right of center. And one other point that I'd point out here is that with the choir on the left and the central mezzanine on the right, it allowed them to put 2 choirs in and do antiphonal music back and forth, singing and re-singing. So that was an important part. The music program was a big part of our programming of the building. So that is really what we've done, and where we are today. This was completed about 2 years ago, and we're actually about to begin in a week or two the St. Callistus Chapel, which is the chapel I showed you in the undercroft and basement, which will seat 250, which will allow smaller services to be held in a smaller space. The ceiling is lower, but it's a beautiful rectangle. It too will be processional. It will have side chapels, and behind it is the bishop's crypt and the columbarium. So it's going to be a very, very beautiful space, and we're looking forward to doing that. I think that's all of my prepared remarks. I'd be happy to, Pia, however you'd like to do this, take questions or comments, anything you'd like to do.